The day Maggie Whitaker learned what family really meant. 3 oranges rolled down her front steps, and not one of her daughters bent down to pick them up. It was 8:17 on a cold Tuesday morning in Maple Falls, Ohio, 6 weeks after the stroke had stolen the strength from her left hand and turned every ordinary thing into a small humiliation. The porch light was still on because Maggie had forgotten to switch it off the night before. Her gray cardigan hung unevenly from one shoulder. Her slippers were damp from the melting frost on the wooden boards. In her right hand, she held a paper grocery bag with milk, oatmeal, and a small sack of oranges she had bought because the doctor said fruit would help her recovery. But the bag tore before she reached the door. One orange dropped first, bouncing softly against the step. Then another. Then a third. They rolled in 3 different directions, bright and round against the dull gray morning, as if even they were trying to leave her. Maggie tried to reach for them, but her left arm hung useless at her side. Her knees trembled. She sat down hard on the top step, breathing through the shame, telling herself not to cry where the neighbors could see. Across the street, a dark blue SUV slowed near the curb. Behind the windshield sat Rebecca, her youngest daughter, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding her phone to her ear. Maggie saw her. Rebecca saw Maggie. For one long second, mother and daughter looked at each other through the glass. Then Rebecca turned her face away, pressed the phone closer, and drove on. Maggie did not call out. Some heartbreaks are too heavy for words. She lowered her eyes to the oranges scattered across the walkway and whispered, "It's all right." But it was not all right. Nothing about a 72-year-old woman sitting alone on frozen porch steps after 3 daughters had refused to take her in was all right. That was when a bicycle tire hissed against the wet pavement. 16-year-old Noah Bennett stopped at the edge of her yard, one backpack strap hanging from his shoulder, his breath white in the cold air. He looked at Maggie, then at the oranges, then at the street where Rebecca's SUV had disappeared. He did not ask questions that would embarrass her. He simply walked up the path, picked up each orange carefully, and placed them back into the torn bag. Then he looked at her with the kind of quiet concern her own children had forgotten how to show, and said, "Ma'am, do you have anyone coming?" Maggie forced a smile so small it almost broke before it reached her face. "My daughters are very busy," she said. Noah nodded, but he did not believe her. And Maggie had no way of knowing that this boy from across the street, this boy with worn sneakers and a cracked phone screen, had just stepped into the story her daughters would spend the rest of their lives regretting. Noah helped Maggie stand, but he did it carefully. The way someone handles something valuable without wanting anyone to notice. He held the torn grocery bag in one hand and offered his other arm, waiting until she chose to take it. Maggie hated needing help. She had spent 72 years being the person other people leaned on, not the person sitting on cold steps with her slippers wet and her pride scattered across the walkway like fruit. But Noah did not make her feel small. That was the first thing she noticed. He walked slowly beside her to the front door, matched his pace to hers, and looked away while she struggled with the key. Inside, the house smelled like lemon furniture polish, old books, and the faint medicinal sharpness of the ointment she rubbed into her stiff hand each morning. On the hallway wall hung photographs in thin gold frames. Evelyn in a graduation gown, Claire in a white dress holding a bouquet, Rebecca outside her first salon with a ribbon-cutting smile. Under every picture was a memory Maggie had paid for in ways her daughters would never fully understand. She had once taken double shifts at Riverside Elementary so Evelyn could finish law school without another loan. She had sold her wedding ring, the last thing her late husband Thomas had placed on her hand, so Claire could have the reception hall she cried over for weeks. She had emptied almost half of her small retirement account to help Rebecca open a beauty shop when every bank in town said no. Maggie never called those things sacrifices. Mothers rarely do. To her, they were just the cost of loving children properly. For 34 years, she had also been the school nurse at Riverside Elementary, the woman with peppermint candies in her cardigan pocket, and a soft voice that could calm a crying first grader before the principal even arrived. Children came to her office with scraped knees, stomach aches, headaches, and sometimes with no real sickness at all, only a quiet need to sit somewhere safe for 10 minutes. Maggie always knew the difference. She kept peanut butter crackers in the bottom drawer for the students who said they forgot breakfast when she knew there had been no breakfast to forget. She washed little faces, tied loose shoelaces, called parents who did not answer, and stayed after the final bell with children whose rides never came. She believed love was not a speech. Love was who stayed. That morning, as Noah set the oranges on her kitchen counter and noticed 3 unopened pill bottles beside the sink, Maggie saw him glance at the photographs on the wall. "You have a big family," he said gently. Maggie looked at her daughter's smiling faces, then at the empty kitchen chairs beneath them. "I used to think so," she said. Noah did not answer. He only reached for the first pill bottle, twisted the cap open without being asked, and placed it beside her glass of water. And for the first time since leaving the hospital, Maggie felt the terrifying warmth of being seen. The hospital had sent Maggie home with 7 pages of instructions, 3 new prescriptions, and 1 sentence she could not stop hearing. She should not be alone during the first stage of recovery. The nurse had said it kindly, standing beside the bed with a clipboard held against her chest. But kindness did not soften the truth. Maggie had looked at the pale blue curtain around her bed, at the plastic water cup on the tray, at the paper bracelet on her wrist, and then at the phone in her lap. She called Evelyn first because Evelyn was the oldest, and because for most of her life, Maggie had believed the oldest child remembered the beginning best. Evelyn answered on the 4th ring, her voice polished and distant, the same voice she used in courtrooms and conference calls. Maggie explained what the doctor said. She did not exaggerate. She did not beg. She only said she needed somewhere safe to stay for a little while, or someone to stay with her. There was a pause long enough for Maggie to hear papers shifting on Evelyn's desk. Then Evelyn sighed and said, "Mom, this is a very difficult week. I have hearings, and Michael is traveling. We should probably look into professional care." Professional care. 2 words that sounded clean enough to hide the abandonment inside them. Maggie thanked her, because old habits of politeness are hard to kill, even when they are killing you quietly. Then she called Claire in Atlanta. Claire cried before Maggie finished the sentence, which almost made it worse. She said she wanted to help. She said she felt awful. She said the guest room was full of boxes, and her husband was under stress, and the children had school, and the timing was just impossible. Maggie listened to every soft excuse and stared at the rain sliding down the hospital window in thin, crooked lines. Rebecca was last. Rebecca lived only 12 minutes away. Maggie had saved her for last because part of her still believed distance mattered, that the daughter closest to her body would be closest to her heart. Rebecca did not cry. She did not pretend. She said, "Mom, maybe this is a sign that the house is too much for you now." Maggie closed her eyes. Not her medicine, not her meals, not her fear. The house. That was the word Rebecca reached for first. A nurse outside the curtain went quiet, as if even a stranger understood what Maggie's own daughter did not. Maggie lowered the phone after the call ended and held it in her good hand until the screen went dark. By afternoon, a medical transport van brought her back to Maple Street. No daughter stood on the porch. No casserole waited on the counter. No fresh sheets had been placed on the bed. Only the old house greeted her, with its cold doorknob, silent rooms, and 3 framed photographs smiling from the hallway like witnesses afraid to speak. Maggie stepped inside, leaned against the wall, and whispered to no one, I raised them better than this. But what she did not know yet was that the first person to truly hear her would not be one of the girls she had carried home from the hospital decades earlier. It would be a boy across the street, watching from behind a rain-streaked window, wondering why nobody had come. By the end of her first week alone, Maggie learned that a house could become too large without changing size. The kitchen felt farther from the bedroom than it ever had. The mailbox at the end of the driveway felt like it had been moved half a mile away. The basement stairs, the laundry basket, the top shelf of the pantry, even the stubborn silver cap on her blood pressure medicine became quiet, little enemies waiting for her every morning. She made lists because lists gave shape to fear. Take pills at 8. Heat oatmeal for 2 minutes. Practice hand exercises 10 times. Walk to the living room and back. Do not forget the cane. Do not sit too long. Do not cry before noon. But Paper could not lift a milk carton with one good hand. Paper could not button a blouse when her fingers refused to obey. Paper could not steady her when the hallway seemed to tilt under her feet. The old house on Maple Street had once been noisy with school shoes, slammed doors, birthday candles, spelling words, hairspray, Christmas music, and 3 daughters calling for her from 3 different rooms. Now it held only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock Thomas had bought at a flea market 40 years earlier. Outside, the neighborhood was changing. Maple Street used to be the kind of place where people borrowed sugar and returned casserole dishes with notes taped to the lid. Now developers drove by slowly in clean trucks, taking photographs of old porches and deep lots. Real estate signs had begun appearing like white flags up and down the block. Maggie did not know that Rebecca had already spoken to a broker named Daniel Price, or that Evelyn had quietly looked up the property records online, or that Claire had asked her husband how much a house like Maggie's might be worth if the land was rezoned. Maggie only knew that her daughters called less after she came home, and when they did call, their voices changed whenever the house came up. Rebecca said it would be safer to sell. Evelyn said it would be practical. Claire said it would give everyone peace of mind. Everyone. That word stayed with Maggie longer than the others. One afternoon, Noah saw her standing at the mailbox in the cold, struggling to pull out a stack of envelopes with her good hand, while a grocery flyer slipped loose and scattered across the wet grass. He crossed the street without thinking. "I can get those, Mrs. Whitaker," he said. Maggie tried to refuse, but her voice did not have the strength for it. Noah gathered the mail, tucked the flyer under his arm, and walked beside her up the driveway. He noticed the front step had a loose board. He noticed the trash bin had not been moved since pickup day. He noticed the porch light was still on again. He noticed everything her daughters had stopped seeing. When they reached the door, Maggie took the mail and gave him a tired smile. "You are a good boy, Noah." He looked down at his worn sneakers, embarrassed by praise he was not used to receiving. "My mom says good is not something you say. It is something you show up for." Maggie stood very still, because those words entered the house like warmth. And across town, while Noah was helping her inside, Rebecca was sitting in a coffee shop with a real estate broker, pointing at a photo of Maggie's house and saying, "My mother is not ready yet, but she will be." The next morning, Noah came back before school, with his backpack half-zipped and his hair still damp from the shower. He told himself he was only checking the loose board on Maggie's front step, but he carried a small screwdriver in his jacket pocket and 2 blueberry muffins wrapped in a paper napkin, because his mother, Noah Bennett, had worked the night shift at Peterson Pharmacy and still managed to bake before falling asleep on the couch. Laura was the kind of woman who came home smelling like hand sanitizer, receipt paper, and cheap coffee, with tired eyes but a steady voice. She had raised Noah alone since he was 9, after his father left Ohio for a job in Arizona and slowly became a birthday card, then a phone call, then nothing at all. Noah understood absence. He understood the shape it left at a kitchen table. Maybe that was why Maggie's quiet house bothered him so much. He knocked lightly, waited, then heard her cane tapping across the floor. When Maggie opened the door, she was wearing the same gray cardigan, buttoned wrong near the collar. She had tried. That was what hurt to see. Noah pretended not to notice. "My mom made extra muffins," he said, holding them out. Maggie looked at the napkin as if it were something expensive. That was kind of her. Noah stepped onto the porch and knelt by the loose board. The wood was cold under his fingers, swollen from years of rain and winter frost. As he tightened the screw, Maggie stood in the doorway watching him with one hand wrapped around the frame. "You will be late," she said. "I have time." He did not. Not really. The high school was almost 2 miles away, and the first bell rang at 8:15, but Noah had learned that some things mattered more than being early. After that, the visits became a rhythm neither of them formally agreed to. Every morning, Noah crossed Maple Street. He rolled the trash bin to the curb on Wednesdays. He brought the newspaper to the kitchen table. He opened the pill bottles and lined them beside a glass of water. He changed the porch bulb, carried laundry from the dryer, and once stood in the grocery store aisle for 10 full minutes, on the phone with Maggie, reading soup labels because she could not remember which brand Thomas used to like. Maggie began leaving something for him, too. A turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, a handwritten note correcting a sentence in his English essay. She learned he wanted to become a nurse, but had never said it out loud at school because dreams felt embarrassing when money was thin. He learned she had kept every thank you card ever written by a child from Riverside Elementary. They were not related. They did not owe each other anything. That was what made it holy. Then one Friday morning, Noah came up the driveway and stopped. An ambulance was parked in front of Maggie's house, its lights flashing silently against the white siding. The front door was open. Her cane lay on the porch floor. And for the first time since he had picked up those oranges, Noah ran. Noah reached the porch just as 2 paramedics were guiding Maggie toward the ambulance, wrapped in a navy blanket with her white hair loose around her face and her right hand gripping the edge of the stretcher rail. She was awake. That was the first thing his mind held on to. Awake, pale, embarrassed, and trying to apologize to everyone for causing trouble. "I'm fine," she kept saying, though nobody believed her. A neighbor had heard a dish break and called for help after Maggie did not answer the door. Noah stood frozen at the bottom step until Maggie saw him. For a second, the fear in her face changed into relief, so honest it made his throat tighten. "Noah," she whispered. He moved closer. "I am here, Mrs. Whitaker." One paramedic looked at him and asked, "Are you family?" Noah opened his mouth, then stopped. The words sat between them like a door he had no right to open. He was 16. He lived across the street. He took out trash and opened medicine bottles. He was not on any form, not in any record, not written anywhere that mattered. "Neighbor," he said quietly. Maggie closed her eyes, and somehow that answer hurt more than if he had said nothing. At Maple Falls Community Hospital, the waiting room smelled like disinfectant, vending machine coffee, and wet winter coats. Noah sat with his backpack on his knees, while nurses moved through the hallway in soft-soled shoes. He texted Laura, and she came straight from her overnight shift, still wearing her pharmacy badge, her eyes tired, but kind. She did not ask why he was there. She only sat beside him and placed one hand on his shoulder. 40 minutes later, Rebecca arrived wearing a cream coat and carrying a leather purse that looked untouched by weather. She did not see Noah at first. She walked to the nurse's station and spoke in a low voice, but the hallway was quiet enough for the words to travel. "Is my mother still considered legally competent to sign documents?" Noah looked up. Laura's hand tightened on his shoulder. The nurse paused, her expression changing in that careful professional way people use when they hear something ugly but cannot say so. "Your mother is being evaluated medically," the nurse replied. "This is not the time for that question." Rebecca glanced around then and saw Noah. Her eyes narrowed, not with concern, but recognition. She knew he had heard. Inside the exam room, Maggie already knew the truth. She had known it from the first phone call, from the way her daughters said safety when they meant sail, from the way they said care when they meant control. When Noah was finally allowed in, he found her sitting upright in bed, a blood pressure cuff around her arm, a paper cup of water beside her, and a calmness on her face that frightened him more than panic would have. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "Rebecca asked about papers." Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand with her good one. Her skin was cool, her fingers thin, but her grip was steady. "I know, sweetheart," she said. "That is why I need you to do something for me." Noah leaned closer. Maggie's eyes moved toward the small closet where her coat hung, then back to him. "There is a steel box under my bed," she whispered. "It has a brass latch and a blue ribbon tied around the handle. I need you to bring it here before my daughters come back together." Noah did not understand. Not yet. He did not know about the old deed, or the letters, or the document waiting inside that box. He only knew Maggie was asking him because she trusted him more than the people who shared her name. Noah did not go home for permission. He ran across Maple Street with Laura beside him, his backpack thumping against his shoulders, and the cold air burning in his chest. Maggie's front door had been pulled closed but not locked, and when Noah stepped inside, the house felt different without her in it. The rooms were too still. The ticking wall clock sounded louder than before. A half-folded dish towel lay on the kitchen floor beside the broken plate that had brought the neighbor running. Laura picked it up gently, as if even the small signs of Maggie's struggle deserved respect. "She said under the bed?" Laura asked. Noah nodded and moved down the hallway toward Maggie's room. He had never been inside before. He stopped at the doorway for half a second, not because he was afraid, but because the room felt private in a way that made him lower his voice, even though no one was there. The bedspread was pale yellow, faded from years of washing. A framed photograph of Thomas Whitaker sat on the dresser, his arm around a much younger Maggie in front of the same house, both of them smiling like the future had promised to be kind. Noah got down on his knees, reached under the bed, and felt the cold edge of metal. The box was heavier than he expected. Gray steel, brass latch, blue ribbon tied around the handle exactly as she had said. Dust clung to the corners. Laura helped him carry it to the kitchen table, but neither of them opened it. Maggie had not asked them to look. That mattered. At the hospital, Maggie's hands trembled when Noah placed the box on the tray beside her bed. She touched the blue ribbon first, not the latch, as if that small strip of fabric held more memory than the steel itself. "Thomas tied that on there," she said softly. "So I would always know which box held the things that mattered." She gave Noah a key from the pocket of her cardigan. Inside were old letters, yellowed photographs, the original deed to the Maple Street house, a folded property appraisal, and a sealed envelope with the name Arthur Caldwell written across the front. Maggie asked Laura to call the number on the envelope. Less than an hour later, Arthur Caldwell arrived in a dark wool coat, carrying a leather briefcase worn smooth at the corners. He was nearly 80, with silver hair, careful eyes, and the quiet manner of a man who had spent his life listening before speaking. He had known Maggie and Thomas for 30 years. He did not look surprised when he saw Noah sitting beside the bed. He looked relieved. Maggie asked Noah to step closer. "I spent my life teaching children the difference between need and greed," she said, her voice thin but clear. "Somehow, I forgot to teach my own." Noah looked down, uncomfortable with words too heavy for him. Maggie slid a folded paper toward Arthur, then pointed to another envelope beneath it. I want the new will prepared exactly the way we discussed. Arthur nodded. Noah's heart beat faster. Mrs. Whitaker, I do not need anything, he said. Maggie turned to him with tired eyes full of something deeper than gratitude. That is why I can trust you with it. Then she asked him to sign one page as a witness to a letter, and Noah wrote his name carefully, never knowing that on the final page, hidden beneath Arthur Caldwell's steady hand, Maggie Whitaker had already written his. For 3 weeks after the hospital scare, Maggie's house on Maple Street became quiet in a different way. Not empty quiet. Watching quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm when every curtain seems to hold its breath. Noah still came every morning, but now Laura came too whenever her schedule allowed. She brought chicken soup in plastic containers, changed Maggie's sheets, and never once made her feel like Charity was entering the room. Maggie grew stronger slowly. She could walk from the bedroom to the kitchen without stopping. She could hold a mug with both hands for a few seconds before her left fingers weakened. She could smile at Noah without the smile looking like something she had to carry. But her daughters had changed too. Evelyn started calling every evening, her voice suddenly warm, suddenly full of concern, asking questions she had not asked when Maggie first came home. Claire mailed a blanket from Atlanta with a handwritten card that said she was praying for peace. Rebecca began showing up with groceries Maggie had not requested and placing them on the counter like proof in a case she was trying to win. None of them mentioned the broker at first. None of them mentioned the property records. None of them mentioned Arthur Caldwell. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, all three arrived together. Evelyn wore a navy dress and carried a folder. Claire held a covered dish with both hands, as if it could protect her from guilt. Rebecca walked in last, eyes moving over the living room, the hallway, the staircase, the walls, measuring everything but her mother's face. Maggie sat in Thomas's old armchair, with a quilt across her lap and a cup of tea cooling beside her. Noah was in the kitchen, putting away the medicine he had picked up from Peterson Pharmacy. Laura stood near the sink, drying a plate. The daughters did not like seeing them there. Rebecca was the first to speak. "Mom, we need to have a family conversation." Maggie looked at Noah through the doorway, then back at Rebecca. "Then speak like family." Evelyn opened the folder and used the careful tone that had made strangers trust her in courtrooms. She said the house was too much. Claire said everyone was worried. Rebecca said outside people were getting too involved. Then her eyes cut toward Noah. "A lonely woman can be influenced without realizing it." The room went still. Noah froze with the brown pharmacy bag in his hand. Laura set the plate down without a sound. Maggie did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She looked at her 3 daughters, one by one, and said, "He remembered my medicine. You remembered my property." Claire's face crumpled. Evelyn looked away. Rebecca flushed red and stepped forward. "You cannot seriously trust a teenage boy over your own daughters." Maggie rested her good hand on the arm of the chair, her fingers thin but steady. "I trusted my daughters when I could not button my coat. I trusted them when I could not open a pill bottle. I trusted them when I came home from the hospital and waited for one of you to knock." Her eyes filled, but her voice did not break. No one came. For the first time, no one in that room had an excuse ready. And upstairs, inside the steel box beneath Maggie's bed, 3 envelopes waited with 3 dried orange slices pressed flat inside them, carrying a lesson her daughters would not understand until it was far too late. Maggie lived 4 more months, and in those 4 months, the house on Maple Street became what it had always wanted to be again. Warm, full, heard. Laura came after overnight shifts and made tea before sleeping in the small guest room. Noah did his homework at Maggie's kitchen table. the same table where Evelyn, Claire, and Rebecca had once practiced spelling words and asked for second helpings of cinnamon toast. Maggie's left hand never fully returned, but her voice did. She told Noah stories from Riverside Elementary, about children who arrived hungry and left smiling, about the little boy who once faked a stomachache every Friday because he was afraid to go home to an empty apartment, about the girl who became a teacher because Maggie had told her she was smart before anyone else did. Noah listened like every word mattered, because to him it did. On her last good morning, Maggie asked him to bring her cardigan, the gray one. He helped slide it over her shoulders, and she reached into the pocket with her good hand, pulling out a peppermint wrapped in clear plastic. "For your first patient someday," she said. Noah tried to laugh, but his eyes filled before he could stop them. Maggie passed peacefully 2 nights later, with Laura holding one hand and Noah holding the other, while snow fell softly against the window and the porch light stayed on. At Arthur Caldwell's office, the daughters sat in a row wearing black, their faces arranged into sorrow, their hands folded over expensive purses. Noah sat beside Laura near the wall, uncomfortable in a borrowed dress shirt. Arthur opened the will with slow, careful hands. First, he gave each daughter a sealed envelope. Evelyn opened hers first, then Claire, then Rebecca. Inside each one was a dried orange slice, pressed flat and fragile, along with a note written in Maggie's careful handwriting. 3 oranges fell. Only one person picked them up. No one spoke. Then Arthur read the rest. The Maple Street house would go to Noah Bennett and Laura Bennett, with one condition. The front room would be turned into a small scholarship office for students from Riverside Elementary who wanted to enter nursing, caregiving, or public service. Maggie's savings would begin the fund. Her daughters would receive the old family photographs, the letters they had written as children, and the memory of what they had chosen when choosing still mattered. Rebecca stood up, her face pale with disbelief. Evelyn whispered that this could not be right. Claire began to cry without sound. Arthur only pressed a button on his laptop. Maggie appeared on the screen, sitting in Thomas's armchair, wrapped in the yellow quilt, clear-eyed and calm. "My daughters thought I was confused," she said. I was not. For the first time in years, I saw everything clearly. Family is not proven by a last name. It is proven by who comes when there is nothing to gain. Years later, Nurse Noah Bennett walked the halls of Riverside Elementary with peppermint candies in his cardigan pocket. When a child asked why he always carried them, he smiled toward the window, where morning light touched the floor, and said, "Because someone once made sure I knew I was worth remembering."